Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that while external funding can accelerate research, the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations prioritize institutional oversight and transparency in all financial matters. A researcher has been offered a significant sum of money directly from a major oil company for a project aligned with the institute's strategic goals. The researcher is eager to begin work immediately to capitalize on the opportunity. Which of the following actions best adheres to the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute? Option A. Misrepresent the source of the funding in an internal proposal, attributing it to a hypothetical internal grant to expedite the research process. Option B. Formally submit the funding proposal and all relevant documentation to the Institute's designated research funding office for review and approval before accepting any funds or commencing work. Option C. Accept the funds directly from the oil company and begin preliminary research, intending to disclose the funding and submit the proposal to the Institute later. Option D. Negotiate the terms of the funding directly with the oil company and use the funds to purchase necessary equipment, informing the Institute only after the equipment is acquired. The correct answer is B. Formally submit the funding proposal and all relevant documentation to the Institute's designated research funding office for review and approval before accepting any funds or commencing work. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to secure funding for a critical research project and the ethical obligation to adhere strictly to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations regarding financial disclosures and the acceptance of external contributions. The pressure to achieve research breakthroughs can sometimes lead individuals to overlook or rationalize minor deviations from established procedures, making careful judgment and unwavering adherence to the regulatory framework paramount. The correct approach involves a transparent and formal submission of the funding proposal through the established internal channels, ensuring all documentation aligns with the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations for research grants and external funding. This approach is correct because it upholds the principles of regulatory compliance and institutional integrity. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of any internal guidelines that mandate the official review and approval of all financial agreements and research funding sources by designated university committees or departments. This ensures accountability, prevents conflicts of interest, and maintains the Institute's reputation. An incorrect approach would be to directly accept the funding from the external company without formal institutional approval, even if the company is a known industry partner. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because it bypasses the Institute's oversight mechanisms designed to vet funding sources, ensure alignment with institutional research priorities, and manage potential conflicts of interest. Such an action directly violates internal regulations that likely require all external funding to be processed through specific administrative channels for review and acceptance. Another incorrect approach would be to misrepresent the source of the funding in the internal proposal to make it appear as an internal grant. This is a severe ethical breach and a direct violation of academic integrity and institutional policy. It undermines trust, creates a false record, and exposes the researcher and the institute to significant reputational and potential legal risks if discovered. A third incorrect approach would be to delay the formal submission process indefinitely while initiating preliminary research using the funds. This is also problematic, as it demonstrates a disregard for established procedures and the principle of transparency. It creates a situation where the institute is unaware of a significant financial commitment and the associated obligations or risks, potentially leading to future complications and noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations concerning research funding, financial disclosures, and external partnerships. When faced with an opportunity for external funding, the professional must prioritize adherence to these regulations. This involves proactively seeking clarification on any ambiguous points, formally submitting all proposals through the designated channels, and ensuring complete transparency with the relevant institutional bodies throughout the process. If there is any doubt about the correct procedure, consulting with the Institute's research administration or legal department is the responsible course of action. Question 2. System analysis indicates that an applicant preparing for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam is asked to generate a question related to the exam's regulatory framework. Which of the following approaches to generating such a question best demonstrates an understanding of the exam's jurisdictional requirements and best practices for academic integrity? Option A. Generating a question that draws heavily on the regulatory framework of a neighboring country's Petroleum Institute entrance exams, as they often share similar technical requirements. Option B. Generating a question that strictly adheres to the internal regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, ensuring no external or generic regulatory concepts are introduced. Option C. Generating a question that uses broad, universally accepted terms for academic assessment without referencing any specific institutional or national regulations to ensure maximum relevance. Option D. Generating a question that incorporates principles from both Russian federal education laws and general international best practices for university admissions, assuming these are universally applicable. The correct answer is B. Generating a question that strictly adheres to the internal regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, ensuring no external or generic regulatory concepts are introduced. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of the foundational principles governing the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance examination process. Specifically, it tests the applicant's ability to identify the core regulatory framework that dictates the exam structure and content, and to understand the implications of adhering to or deviating from these established guidelines. Misinterpreting or ignoring these requirements can lead to disqualification or a flawed understanding of the examination's purpose. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing that the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam is governed by its own specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines. This framework is paramount and must be followed exclusively. Adhering strictly to this internal regulatory framework ensures that the applicant understands and respects the examination's jurisdiction, demonstrating a commitment to following established rules and procedures, which is a fundamental professional expectation in any academic or professional setting. This approach prioritizes the integrity and validity of the examination process as defined by the institution itself. Incorrect approach is analysis. Referencing or applying regulations from other countries or jurisdictions is a significant regulatory failure. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam operates under its own defined legal and institutional framework. Introducing external regulations demonstrates a lack of understanding of the exam's specific jurisdiction and a failure to adhere to its governing principles. This is not merely an oversight but a fundamental disregard for the established rules of the examination. Using generic regulatory terms when a specific jurisdiction is mentioned is also a failure. The prompt explicitly states the jurisdiction: Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam. Generic terms lack the precision required to demonstrate an understanding of the specific legal and administrative context of this particular examination. It suggests an inability to engage with the specific requirements of the task. Combining multiple jurisdictions in a single answer is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. It indicates a complete misunderstanding of the concept of jurisdictional boundaries and the importance of adhering to the rules of a single, defined system. For an entrance exam, this demonstrates a lack of attention to detail and an inability to follow instructions, which are essential qualities for successful academic pursuit. Professional reasoning. Professionals must first identify the precise scope and jurisdiction of any given task or regulation. In an examination context, this means understanding the specific rules and guidelines set forth by the examining body. When faced with a question that emphasizes jurisdictional compliance, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the explicitly stated jurisdiction. 2. Prioritizing adherence to the rules and regulations of that specific jurisdiction above all else. 3. Actively avoiding any reference to or application of rules from other jurisdictions. 4. Ensuring that all responses are tailored to the specific requirements and context of the defined jurisdiction. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are compliant, relevant, and demonstrate a professional understanding of the operational environment. Question 3. Regulatory review indicates that the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute is considering several process optimization strategies to improve efficiency in its refining operations. Which of the following approaches best balances operational improvement with adherence to Russian environmental protection laws and regulations? Option A. Implementing process changes that demonstrably reduce waste generation and emissions, following established environmental impact assessment procedures and obtaining all necessary permits. Option B. Initiating a campaign to lobby for the revision of current environmental standards to accommodate the proposed efficiency gains. Option C. Prioritizing process modifications solely based on their potential for cost savings, with minimal consideration for environmental impact. Option D. Proceeding with process optimization that have been previously approved for similar operations in other regions, without specific local environmental review. The correct answer is A. Implementing process changes that demonstrably reduce waste generation and emissions, following established environmental impact assessment procedures and obtaining all necessary permits. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between optimizing operational processes for efficiency and adhering to the stringent environmental protection regulations mandated by the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's governing framework, which aligns with Russian federal environmental legislation. The need to balance economic viability with ecological responsibility requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of legal obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of proposed process modifications, prioritizing those that demonstrably reduce environmental impact while maintaining or improving operational efficiency. This requires consulting relevant environmental impact assessment guidelines and obtaining necessary permits before implementation. Specifically, this approach aligns with Article 16 of the Federal Law on Environmental Protection, Russia, which mandates that economic and other activities be carried out in a way that ensures environmental protection and rational use of natural resources. It also reflects the precautionary principle, requiring proactive measures to prevent environmental harm. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering environmental consequences fails to comply with the aforementioned federal law and associated decrees on industrial emissions and waste management. This oversight can lead to significant fines, legal liabilities, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes without proper environmental impact assessments or necessary permits, directly violates procedural requirements outlined in Russian environmental legislation, such as those stipulated by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory due diligence. A third incorrect approach, which involves lobbying for the relaxation of existing environmental standards, is ethically questionable and legally precarious, as it attempts to circumvent established protective measures rather than operating within their framework. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of applicable environmental laws and regulations. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment of any proposed process changes, considering both operational and environmental factors. Consultation with environmental specialists and legal counsel is crucial. The process should include obtaining all required permits and conducting post-implementation monitoring to ensure ongoing compliance. Ethical considerations, such as the long-term impact on the environment and community, should be integrated into the decision-making process. Question 4. Consider a scenario where, during the final review of the entrance examination questions for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute, a subject matter expert identifies a question that, while technically correct, is perceived as significantly more complex and potentially outside the scope of typical preparation for a candidate at this level, potentially disadvantaging a portion of applicants. What is the most appropriate course of action for the expert to ensure the integrity and fairness of the examination process? Option A. Proceed with the examination as planned, trusting that the candidates will demonstrate their knowledge regardless of the question's perceived difficulty. Option B. Discreetly rephrase the question to simplify its complexity, aiming to make it more accessible to a wider range of candidates without formal consultation. Option C. Inform the examination board of the concern, providing a detailed explanation of the perceived issue and its potential impact, and await their decision on whether to modify or remove the question. Option D. Remove the question entirely from the examination without informing anyone, assuming it is better to omit a potentially problematic question than to risk candidate confusion. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the examination as planned, trusting that the candidates will demonstrate their knowledge regardless of the question's perceived difficulty. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical imperative to maintain the integrity of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance examination process. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient and effective candidate assessment with the absolute requirement of fairness and adherence to established examination protocols. Any deviation from these protocols, even with seemingly good intentions, can undermine the credibility of the entire admission process and potentially lead to accusations of bias or unfair advantage. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of the examination materials against the established syllabus and learning objectives, followed by a transparent communication of any identified discrepancies to the examination board for their decision. This aligns with the principles of academic integrity and due process, ensuring that all candidates are evaluated on a consistent and predefined basis. Specifically, referencing the internal regulations and guidelines of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute for examination development and review would be paramount. This process ensures that any proposed changes or considerations are handled through the proper institutional channels, maintaining accountability and transparency. An incorrect approach of unilaterally modifying the examination questions based on perceived difficulty or relevance without formal approval from the examination board represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses established procedures, potentially introducing bias and compromising the standardization of the assessment. It violates the principle of fairness to all candidates, as some may have prepared based on the original material, while others might benefit from the ad hoc changes. Furthermore, it undermines the authority of the examination board and the established regulatory framework governing the entrance exams. Another incorrect approach of prioritizing speed of completion over thoroughness in the review process is also professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is desirable, it must not come at the expense of accuracy and adherence to established quality control measures. Rushing the review could lead to overlooked errors or misinterpretations of the syllabus, ultimately impacting the validity of the examination. This neglects the professional duty to ensure the highest standards in assessment design. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the institute's examination regulations and ethical guidelines. When faced with a potential issue, the professional should first identify the specific regulation or guideline that is relevant. Then, they should gather all necessary information and document their observations objectively. The next step is to consult with the designated authority or committee responsible for examination oversight, presenting the findings and seeking their guidance or decision. This structured approach ensures that actions are taken within the established framework, upholding fairness, transparency, and the integrity of the examination process. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a potential challenge for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance examination process is ensuring the academic integrity of the assessment. Which of the following represents the most appropriate focus for this risk assessment? Option A. Evaluating the potential for examination questions to be leaked or for candidates to engage in unauthorized collaboration during the exam. Option B. Assessing the financial reserves of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute and its long-term investment strategies. Option C. Analyzing the market demand for petroleum engineers and the institute's competitive position in the global energy sector. Option D. Determining the average starting salary of graduates from similar petroleum engineering programs worldwide. The correct answer is A. Evaluating the potential for examination questions to be leaked or for candidates to engage in unauthorized collaboration during the exam. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the prospective student to apply risk assessment principles within the specific context of an educational institution's entrance examination, rather than a typical financial or operational setting. The challenge lies in identifying and evaluating risks that are unique to the academic admissions process, such as ensuring fairness, academic integrity, and compliance with the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's established admission regulations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between relevant academic risks and those that fall outside the scope of the entrance exam's purview. The correct approach involves identifying potential risks to the integrity and fairness of the entrance examination process itself. This includes evaluating the likelihood and impact of issues such as inadequate question design, potential for cheating, or biases in the assessment criteria. The justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental principles of academic governance and the need for transparent and equitable admissions process, as implicitly governed by the Institute's internal regulations and educational standards. A robust risk assessment in this context aims to safeguard the quality of incoming students and the reputation of the Institute. An incorrect approach would be to focus on risks unrelated to the entrance examination's academic or administrative integrity, such as the financial viability of the institute or the long-term career prospects of graduates. Focusing on the financial viability of the institute falls outside the scope of an entrance exam risk assessment. The exam's purpose is to select qualified candidates, not to assess the institution's financial health. Similarly, assessing the long-term career prospects of graduates is a broader institutional concern, not a direct risk to the entrance examination process itself. These approaches fail because they misdirect the risk assessment away from its intended purpose, which is to ensure the validity and fairness of the selection process, thereby violating the implicit regulatory expectation of a focused and relevant assessment. Professionals in academic admissions should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the core objectives of the admissions process. This involves clearly defining the scope of the risk assessment, identifying potential threats to those objectives, analyzing the likelihood and impact of these threats, and developing mitigation strategies. For an entrance exam, this means focusing on risks that could compromise the academic meritocracy and fairness of the selection, aligning with the Institute's commitment to admitting qualified individuals. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that a promising candidate for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute has submitted an application that appears strong, but an anonymous external contact has provided the admissions committee with additional, unsolicited information about the candidate's past performance and potential future contributions. This information, if true, could significantly bolster the candidate's profile, but it was not obtained through the standard application process and raises concerns about data privacy and the fairness of the review. What is the most ethically and procedurally sound course of action for the admissions committee? Option A. Directly contact the candidate's current employer, as indicated by the anonymous source, to verify the additional performance details provided. Option B. Disregard the unsolicited information entirely and proceed with the admissions review as if no external contact had been made, to avoid any potential procedural complications. Option C. Acknowledge the unsolicited information, but inform the candidate that such information must be submitted through official channels and proceed with the review based solely on the officially submitted application materials, while also ensuring the anonymous source's information is handled with strict confidentiality and not used in the decision. Option D. Accept the unsolicited information as potentially valuable and incorporate it into the candidate's file for a more comprehensive review, without informing the candidate or seeking further official verification. The correct answer is C. Acknowledge the unsolicited information, but inform the candidate that such information must be submitted through official channels and proceed with the review based solely on the officially submitted application materials, while also ensuring the anonymous source's information is handled with strict confidentiality and not used in the decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical obligation to protect confidential data and the integrity of the admissions process. The pressure to admit a promising candidate, especially one with potential ties to the Institute's future success, can create a temptation to bypass established procedures. Careful judgment is required to uphold the Institute's values and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's established admissions policies and data privacy regulations. This means that all information, regardless of its source or perceived benefit, must be handled through official channels and verified according to protocol. The ethical justification lies in maintaining fairness and transparency in the admissions process, preventing any undue influence or preferential treatment, and safeguarding the confidentiality of applicant data as mandated by internal guidelines and potentially broader Russian Federation data protection laws. An incorrect approach of directly contacting the applicant's current employer for additional information without the applicant's explicit consent would violate data privacy principles and potentially breach trust. This action could also be seen as an attempt to circumvent the standard admissions review, which is ethically unsound and could lead to accusations of bias or unfairness. Another incorrect approach, that of accepting the information provided by the external contact without independent verification through official channels, risks admitting a candidate based on potentially biased or inaccurate information. This undermines the integrity of the admissions process and fails to meet the Institute's standards for due diligence. Finally, an incorrect approach of ignoring the information and proceeding with the application as if it were never received would be a failure of due diligence. While it avoids the pitfalls of the other incorrect approaches, it also misses an opportunity to gather potentially relevant, albeit sensitive, information through proper channels, which could be important for a holistic assessment of the candidate. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the ethical and regulatory boundaries. 2. Consulting internal policies and guidelines regarding data handling and admissions. 3. Prioritizing fairness, transparency, and data privacy. 4. Seeking guidance from supervisors or the admissions committee if the situation is unclear. 5. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made. Question 7. The analysis reveals that preliminary data suggests a potential bottleneck in the processing of applicant documentation for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance examination, which could delay the overall admission timeline. Considering the absolute priority of adhering strictly to the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, which of the following actions best represents a compliant and professionally sound approach to address this potential bottleneck? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's official admission regulations and internal procedural guidelines to determine if and how the document processing workflow can be adjusted to improve efficiency while strictly adhering to all stipulated requirements. Option B. Immediately implement a revised document verification protocol that prioritizes speed based on general efficiency best practices observed in international educational institutions to expedite the process. Option C. Inform the applicants that the process may be delayed due to unforeseen documentation processing issues and await further instructions from higher administrative bodies without proposing any immediate solutions. Option D. Consult with external experts in admissions process management from other countries to gain insights into innovative solutions for handling high volumes of applications. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement a revised document verification protocol that prioritizes speed based on general efficiency best practices observed in international educational institutions to expedite the process. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient resource allocation with the ethical imperative of fair and transparent admission processes, particularly within the context of a competitive entrance examination for a specialized institution like the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the institute's admission regulations to a situation where preliminary data suggests potential processing bottlenecks. A hasty or biased approach could lead to unfair outcomes for applicants and damage the institute's reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's official admission regulations and internal procedural guidelines. This approach prioritizes adherence to established rules, ensuring that any process optimization is undertaken within the legal and ethical boundaries set by the institute and relevant Russian Federation educational legislation. Specifically, it requires identifying if the current admission process, as documented in the regulations, allows for the proposed optimization without compromising fairness, transparency, or the integrity of the examination. If the regulations permit flexibility, optimization can be explored, but always with a focus on enhancing efficiency without disadvantaging any applicant group. This aligns with the principles of good governance and fair competition mandated by educational standards. An incorrect approach would be to unilaterally implement process changes based solely on preliminary efficiency data, without consulting the official admission regulations. This could lead to violations of established procedures, potentially creating grounds for appeals or legal challenges from applicants. For instance, prioritizing speed over thoroughness in document verification, or altering the order of assessment stages without regulatory approval, could be seen as discriminatory or unfair. Another incorrect approach would be to seek external advice from institutions in different jurisdictions, or to rely on general best practices without verifying their applicability and legality within the specific regulatory framework of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute and the Russian Federation. This ignores the absolute priority of adhering to the exam's specified jurisdiction. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the existing regulatory framework governing the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance exams. Second, identify the specific operational challenge or opportunity for optimization. Third, evaluate potential solutions against the established regulations, considering their impact on fairness, transparency, and applicant rights. Fourth, if optimization is deemed feasible and compliant, develop a detailed implementation plan that is also documented and approved according to internal procedures. Finally, monitor the implemented changes to ensure continued compliance and effectiveness. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a high probability of successful extraction and low operational risks for a new exploration project in a region with sensitive ecosystems. However, preliminary environmental assessments suggest potential impacts on local water sources and biodiversity. Considering the regulatory framework of the Russian Federation, which approach best balances the project's potential benefits with its responsibilities. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive environmental and social impact assessment, engage with local communities and environmental authorities, and adjust project plans to mitigate identified risks before proceeding. Option B. Delay the project indefinitely due to the potential for environmental impacts, even if the risk matrix suggests operational success. Option C. Proceed with the project as planned, focusing on the low operational risks identified in the matrix, and address any environmental concerns reactively if they arise. Option D. Prioritize the economic benefits indicated by the risk matrix and seek regulatory approval based on the low operational risk, assuming environmental impacts will be minimal. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the project as planned, focusing on the low operational risks identified in the matrix, and address any environmental concerns reactively if they arise. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in the oil and gas industry, where a project's perceived benefits, as highlighted by a risk matrix, might overshadow potential environmental and social impacts. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam would likely assess a candidate's understanding of responsible resource development, which is governed by Russian Federation regulations concerning environmental protection, subsoil use, and industrial safety. A candidate's ability to identify and prioritize these regulatory considerations over purely economic or operational advantages is crucial. The correct approach involves prioritizing compliance with the federal law on environmental protection and the federal law on subsoil, which mandate thorough environmental impact assessments and responsible resource extraction. This approach recognizes that, while the risk matrix may indicate operational feasibility, it does not absolve the institute or its stakeholders from their legal and ethical obligations to minimize harm to the environment and local communities. Adherence to these laws ensures sustainable development and prevents potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the positive risk indicators without a comprehensive environmental and social due diligence fails to comply with the federal law on environmental protection. This law requires proactive measures to prevent environmental damage and mandates public consultations for projects impacting natural resources. Another incorrect approach, which might prioritize immediate economic gains as indicated by the risk matrix, overlooks the federal law on subsoil, which emphasizes the rational and comprehensive use of subsoil resources and the protection of the subsoil from depletion and pollution. Such an approach could lead to long-term environmental degradation and conflict with regulatory bodies. Furthermore, an approach that dismisses potential risks as minor without proper scientific or regulatory assessment violates the principles of responsible industrial practice and could contravene regulations related to industrial safety and hazard management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable Russian Federation laws and regulations relevant to the project. This includes environmental, subsoil, and safety legislation. Following this, a comprehensive risk assessment should be conducted, not just for operational efficiency, but also for environmental and social impacts. Stakeholder engagement, including consultation with local communities and environmental agencies, is a critical step. Finally, decisions should be made based on a balanced consideration of economic viability, operational feasibility, and most importantly, regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility towards the environment and society. Question 9. To address the challenge of securing immediate funding for critical research equipment, while ensuring the long-term environmental integrity and regulatory compliance of its petroleum resource exploration activities, which approach should the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute prioritize? Option A. Expedite resource extraction agreements with any interested party offering the highest upfront payment, prioritizing immediate financial gain over detailed environmental impact assessments or long-term sustainability considerations. Option B. Seek to bypass standard procurement and partnership vetting processes to quickly secure a funding deal, focusing on speed and financial return rather than due diligence. Option C. Minimize reporting on extraction activities and environmental monitoring data to reduce administrative burden and present a more favorable financial outlook to potential partners. Option D. Pursue partnerships with experienced extraction companies that demonstrate a strong commitment to adhering to all Russian environmental protection laws and regulations, and incorporate robust sustainability clauses into all agreements, even if this means a slightly longer negotiation period and potentially less immediate revenue. Correct answer is D. Pursue partnerships with experienced extraction companies that demonstrate a strong commitment to adhering to all Russian environmental protection laws and regulations, and incorporate robust sustainability clauses into all agreements, even if this means a slightly longer negotiation period and potentially less immediate revenue. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial interests of the Institute and the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of resource management. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute, as an educational and research institution, has a responsibility to its students, faculty, and the broader community to operate responsibly and ethically, particularly when dealing with natural resources. The pressure to secure funding can lead to decisions that might compromise environmental standards or long-term viability, necessitating a careful balancing act. The correct approach involves prioritizing the Institute's long-term strategic goals, which include sustainable resource management and maintaining its reputation as a responsible academic entity over short-term financial gains. This aligns with the principles of responsible stewardship and the ethical obligations of an institution entrusted with natural resources. Specifically, adhering to the established regulatory framework for resource extraction and environmental protection within the Russian Federation, as applicable to educational institutions, is paramount. This includes ensuring all activities are conducted in accordance with environmental impact assessments, safety protocols, and reporting requirements mandated by relevant Russian federal and regional laws governing the petroleum industry and educational institutions. Such an approach safeguards the Institute from legal repercussions, reputational damage, and ensures the continued availability of resources for future research and educational endeavors. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing immediate revenue from resource extraction without adequate consideration for environmental impact or regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This would violate Russian environmental laws and regulations, potentially leading to fines, operational shutdowns, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves circumventing established procurement or partnership procedures to secure a quick deal, would undermine transparency and accountability, exposing the Institute to risks of corruption and mismanagement, violating internal governance policies and potentially Russian anti-corruption legislation. A third incorrect approach, which involves downplaying or ignoring potential environmental risks to expedite the extraction process, demonstrates a disregard for the precautionary principle and the legal duty to protect natural resources, leading to potential long-term ecological damage and legal liabilities under Russian environmental law. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Russian legal and regulatory landscape governing resource extraction, environmental protection, and institutional governance. This should be followed by an assessment of all potential stakeholders' interests and the long-term implications of each decision. Ethical considerations, including the principles of sustainability and responsible resource management, must be integrated into the evaluation process. Finally, decisions should be made transparently, with appropriate documentation and adherence to established institutional policies and procedures, ensuring alignment with the Institute's mission and its obligations to society. Question 10. The review process indicates that during the administration of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, an administrator discovers that one of the applicants is a close relative. The administrator is responsible for overseeing the exam session and ensuring all candidates are treated equally and fairly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the administrator to take? Option A. Ignore the relationship and proceed with administering the exam as usual, assuming it will not affect their impartiality. Option B. Discreetly provide the applicant with minor assistance during the exam to ensure they perform well due to the personal connection. Option C. Immediately report the relationship to the head proctor or admissions committee and recuse themselves from any direct involvement with that applicant's examination process. Option D. Publicly announce the relationship to all candidates and then proceed with the exam, stating they will be extra vigilant. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the relationship to the head proctor or admissions committee and recuse themselves from any direct involvement with that applicant's examination process. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest scenario during the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam administration. The situation is professionally challenging because it requires the exam administrator to balance their duty to ensure a fair and impartial examination process with their personal relationships. The integrity of the entrance exam is paramount, and any perception or reality of favoritism can undermine the credibility of the institute and the admission process. Careful judgment is required to navigate such situations ethically and in accordance with the institute's regulations. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the situation to the designated authority within the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute responsible for exam oversight, such as the admissions committee or a proctoring supervisor. This approach is the most professionally sound because it adheres to the principle of transparency and ensures that an independent body can assess the situation and make an objective decision. By reporting, the administrator avoids making a personal judgment that could be perceived as biased and allows for a formal process to manage the conflict, thereby upholding the fairness and impartiality of the entrance exam as mandated by the Institute's internal regulations and general principles of academic integrity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and proceed with administering the exam without disclosure. This fails to uphold the duty of impartiality and creates a significant risk of perceived or actual unfairness. It violates the implicit trust placed in exam administrators to conduct examinations without bias and could lead to challenges to the validity of the exam results for the applicant in question, potentially requiring a re-examination or invalidating their application. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to discreetly assist the applicant, perhaps by offering subtle hints or allowing minor deviations from exam rules. This is a direct violation of exam regulations and ethical conduct. It constitutes academic dishonesty and undermines the competitive nature of the entrance exam, disadvantaging other applicants who are assessed solely on their own merit. Such actions would severely damage the reputation of the institute and could lead to severe disciplinary action for the administrator. A third incorrect approach would be to disqualify the applicant solely based on the personal relationship, without following the institute's established procedures for handling conflicts of interest. While the intention might be to avoid bias, this action bypasses the proper channels for addressing such issues and could be seen as an arbitrary decision. The institute's regulations likely outline a specific process for managing conflicts of interest, which would involve reporting and a decision by a supervisory body, not unilateral action by an administrator. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations regarding exam administration, conflicts of interest, and ethical conduct. When faced with a potential conflict, the immediate step is to identify the conflict and its potential impact on the fairness of the process. The next step is to consult the relevant policies and procedures. If a conflict exists, the administrator must then report it to the appropriate authority, abstaining from any decision-making regarding the applicant involved. This ensures that the situation is handled transparently, impartially, and in accordance with established institutional guidelines. Question 11. What factors determine the appropriate ethical response when a faculty member at the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute becomes aware of a potential impropriety concerning an applicant's preparation for the entrance examination? Option A. The perceived difficulty of the examination and the applicant's expressed desire to succeed. Option B. The potential impact of the applicant's admission on the institute's overall ranking and reputation. Option C. The established regulations of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute regarding examination integrity and the principle of fair assessment for all applicants. Option D. The applicant's academic potential and the faculty member's personal relationship with the applicant. Correct answer is D. The applicant's academic potential and the faculty member's personal relationship with the applicant. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain academic integrity while navigating potential conflicts of interest and the pressure to achieve institutional goals. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute, like any educational institution, is bound by regulations and ethical codes that prioritize fair assessment and the prevention of academic dishonesty. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to support a promising student with the imperative to uphold the institute's standards and the fairness of the entrance examination process. A professional in this situation must act with impartiality and transparency, adhering strictly to the established examination procedures and ethical guidelines. The correct approach involves a commitment to the established examination protocols and a refusal to deviate from them, even under pressure. This upholds the principle of equal opportunity for all applicants and ensures the credibility of the entrance examination. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of academic integrity and fairness that are fundamental to any reputable educational institution, including the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. Any action that circumvents or manipulates the examination process for a specific candidate, regardless of their potential, undermines the integrity of the admissions process and violates ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to provide the student with advance information about the examination content. This constitutes a direct breach of academic integrity and fairness, creating an unfair advantage for one candidate over others. Such an action would violate the spirit and letter of any examination regulations designed to ensure a level playing field. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly alter the examination questions or scoring criteria for this particular student. This is a form of academic dishonesty and a severe ethical lapse, as it manipulates the assessment process and compromises the validity of the results. Finally, ignoring the situation and allowing the student to proceed without addressing the potential impropriety would be a failure of professional responsibility, as it tacitly condones a situation that could lead to unfairness and a compromised admissions process. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established rules and ethical codes. This involves 1. Identifying the core ethical principles at play: fairness, integrity, impartiality. 2. Consulting relevant institutional policies and regulations regarding examinations and academic conduct. 3. Avoiding any action that could be perceived as creating an unfair advantage or compromising the integrity of the process. 4. Seeking guidance from superiors or ethics committees if the situation is ambiguous or presents a significant ethical dilemma. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all decisions are transparent, justifiable, and in full compliance with the regulatory framework governing the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that investing in a new, more efficient drilling technology for the Institute's research facilities would significantly reduce operational expenses and increase the volume of extracted samples for study, thereby enhancing research output and potential for external funding. However, preliminary assessments suggest this technology might have a higher localized environmental footprint during its initial setup phase compared to existing methods, potentially impacting nearby water sources. Considering the regulatory framework governing educational institutions and petroleum research in the Russian Federation, which approach best aligns with professional and legal obligations. Option A. Conduct a thorough environmental impact assessment (IA) in accordance with Russian Federation law on environmental protection and relevant regional regulations. Consult with environmental experts and develop a comprehensive mitigation plan before any decision is made, ensuring compliance with all water and land use regulations. Option B. Delay the decision indefinitely until a perfect, zero-impact technology is developed, prioritizing absolute environmental preservation over research advancement and financial sustainability. Option C. Proceed with the new technology immediately, as the cost savings and research benefits demonstrably outweigh the potential, albeit temporary, environmental concerns, with a commitment to address any issues that arise post-implementation. Option D. Implement the new technology, but allocate a minimal portion of the projected cost savings to a general environmental fund, without specific assessment or mitigation plans for the identified localized impact. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the new technology immediately, as the cost savings and research benefits demonstrably outweigh the potential, albeit temporary, environmental concerns, with a commitment to address any issues that arise post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a proposed project against potential long-term environmental and social impacts, all within the specific regulatory framework of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's entrance exam context. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant regulations, which are assumed to be specific to the Russian Federation's environmental and educational oversight bodies, to a practical decision-making process. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any decision aligns with both the Institute's operational goals and its legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes adherence to all applicable environmental protection laws and regulations of the Russian Federation, as well as the internal guidelines of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute concerning sustainable development and research ethics. This approach is right because it ensures that the institute operates within legal boundaries, minimizes potential harm to the environment, and upholds its responsibility to future generations. Specifically, it would involve consulting relevant articles of the Russian Federation's environmental protection law, water and land codes, and any specific decrees or standards related to petroleum industry operations and educational institution land use. Ethical considerations regarding the Institute's role in fostering responsible scientific practices are also paramount. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing immediate financial returns without adequate environmental impact assessment would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the principles of sustainable development enshrined in Russian environmental legislation and could lead to legal penalties, reputational damage, and long-term ecological harm. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term cost savings by cutting corners on safety and environmental monitoring would also be a direct contravention of safety regulations and environmental protection laws, potentially resulting in accidents and pollution. Furthermore, an approach that disregards the Institute's internal ethical guidelines or the spirit of its educational mission by overlooking potential negative societal impacts would be professionally unacceptable, undermining the Institute's credibility and its role in educating future professionals. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stakeholder consultation, a thorough environmental and social impact assessment conducted by qualified experts, and a rigorous review against all relevant federal and regional laws and Institute policies. This process should explicitly consider the precautionary principle, ensuring that potential risks are identified and mitigated before proceeding. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute has submitted an application that appears to meet the basic academic requirements, but a faculty member with influence in the admissions committee informally suggests that the candidate be admitted due to a personal acquaintance, despite some minor discrepancies in the submitted documentation that have not been fully clarified. Which of the following actions best upholds the regulatory framework for educational admissions in Russia? Option A. Admit the candidate but flag the documentation discrepancies for future review, prioritizing the faculty member's influence to expedite the process. Option B. Proceed with the admission of the candidate based on the faculty member's recommendation, assuming the acquaintance implies a level of trust and the discrepancies are minor. Option C. Reject the candidate's application immediately due to the unclarified documentation, without further investigation or consideration of the faculty member's input. Option D. Initiate a formal review of the candidate's application, ensuring all documentation is verified against the official admission requirements of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute and Federal Law No. 273 FC on education in the Russian Federation, and address any discrepancies through established procedures, irrespective of informal recommendations. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the admission of the candidate based on the faculty member's recommendation, assuming the acquaintance implies a level of trust and the discrepancies are minor. Explanation. The assessment process for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam requires candidates to demonstrate an understanding of the regulatory framework governing educational institutions and admissions in Russia, specifically within the context of higher education. This scenario is professionally challenging because it tests the candidate's ability to identify and apply the correct legal and ethical principles governing admissions, ensuring fairness and compliance with national educational standards. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to invalid admissions, legal challenges, and damage to the institute's reputation. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the official regulations and guidelines established by the Ministry of Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation and the internal charter of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. This means ensuring that all admission criteria are transparent, non-discriminatory, and applied uniformly to all applicants. The justification for this approach lies in the legal mandate to uphold educational standards, prevent corruption, and guarantee equal access to higher education for all qualified individuals. Specifically, Federal Law No. 273 FC on education in the Russian Federation and the Institute's own admission rules, approved in accordance with this law, are the primary governing documents. An incorrect approach that relies on informal recommendations or personal connections bypasses the established legal framework. This constitutes a violation of anti-corruption laws and regulations governing educational admissions, as it introduces bias and undermines merit-based selection. Such an action would be contrary to the principles of fairness and equal opportunity enshrined in Russian educational law. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, such as admitting a candidate without verifying all required documents against the official list, risks admitting unqualified individuals or those who have not met the statutory requirements. This failure to adhere to procedural due diligence can lead to the invalidation of admissions and potential disciplinary action against the admissions committee. It directly contravenes the Institute's admission rules and the overarching educational legislation that mandates rigorous verification processes. A third incorrect approach that involves creating arbitrary or undocumented additional requirements for specific applicants introduces discriminatory practices. This is a direct violation of Article 5 of Federal Law No. 273 FC, which prohibits discrimination in education based on any grounds. Such actions undermine the integrity of the admission process and can lead to legal disputes and reputational damage for the institute. The professional decision-making process for such situations involves a systematic review of the official admission regulations, consultation with legal counsel or senior administrative staff if ambiguities arise, and a commitment to impartial and transparent application of all criteria. Professionals must prioritize adherence to the law and ethical conduct, ensuring that all decisions are justifiable and documented according to established procedures. Question 14. Operational review demonstrates a minor but noticeable oil seep from a pipeline section during routine inspection at the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's field operations. The seep is not currently causing significant visible environmental damage, but its potential to worsen exists. The inspector is aware of the Institute's internal reporting protocols and the general environmental regulations of the Russian Federation concerning petroleum operations. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the inspector? Option A. Discreetly record the seep in personal notes and continue the inspection, planning to report it during the next scheduled departmental meeting. Option B. Immediately initiate containment measures for the SEEP, and then promptly report the incident with all relevant details to the designated Internal Safety and Environmental Department, and await further instructions. Option C. Document the SEEP thoroughly but wait for the shift supervisor to arrive and provide explicit instructions on how to proceed. Option D. Attempt to temporarily patch the SEEP using available materials to stop it completely before reporting, to minimize potential negative reporting. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate containment measures for the SEEP, and then promptly report the incident with all relevant details to the designated Internal Safety and Environmental Department, and await further instructions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate need to address a potential environmental hazard and the established procedures for reporting and authorization within the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's operational framework. The urgency of the situation demands swift action, but bypassing established protocols can lead to significant regulatory noncompliance and potential safety risks if not managed correctly. Careful judgment is required to balance immediate response with adherence to institutional and potentially broader environmental regulations. The correct approach involves immediate containment of the spill to prevent further environmental damage, followed by prompt and accurate reporting to the designated internal authorities and relevant external environmental oversight bodies as stipulated by Russian Federation environmental protection laws and internal institute safety guidelines. This approach prioritizes both environmental safety and regulatory compliance. By containing the spill, the immediate threat is mitigated. By reporting accurately and promptly, the Institute fulfills its legal obligations, allows for proper assessment and remediation planning by authorized personnel, and maintains transparency. This aligns with the principles of responsible environmental stewardship and adherence to the legal framework governing petroleum operations in Russia. An incorrect approach of attempting to conceal the spill or downplay its severity is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This would violate Article 11 of the federal law on environmental protection, which mandates timely and accurate information about environmental conditions and incidents. It also undermines the Institute's commitment to transparency and responsible operations. Another incorrect approach of initiating cleanup operations without proper authorization or notification to internal safety and environmental departments, while seemingly proactive, poses significant risks. This could lead to improper cleanup methods that are ineffective or even exacerbate environmental damage, and it bypasses the established chain of command and expert oversight mandated by internal safety protocols, and potentially by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of the Russian Federation. Such actions could also lead to non-compliance with specific waste disposal regulations. Third incorrect approach of waiting for explicit instructions from higher management before taking any action, even after initial containment, could be detrimental. While respecting hierarchy is important, prolonged inaction in the face of an ongoing environmental incident, especially after initial containment, could be interpreted as negligence and a failure to act in the best interest of environmental protection, potentially violating the duty of care expected of personnel. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a rapid assessment of the immediate threat, followed by taking all necessary steps to mitigate the immediate danger, e.g., containment. Simultaneously, the professional must immediately initiate the established reporting procedures, ensuring all relevant information is conveyed to the appropriate internal and external bodies as per Russian Federation environmental laws and institute regulations. This involves understanding the reporting threshold and timelines defined by these frameworks. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal a significant overlap between the answers provided by an applicant for the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam and previously submitted work by another candidate from a prior year, suggesting potential plagiarism. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Institute's admissions committee? Option A. Disregard the quality control findings as preliminary and proceed with the applicant's admission, assuming the overlap may be coincidental. Option B. Forward the findings to the relevant academic department for a preliminary assessment and await their recommendation before taking any action. Option C. Immediately disqualify the applicant from the entrance examination and inform them of the decision based on the quality control findings. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation into the suspected plagiarism, gathering all relevant documentation, and providing the applicant with an opportunity to respond to the allegations before a final decision is made. The correct answer is C. Immediately disqualify the applicant from the entrance examination and inform them of the decision based on the quality control findings. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge related to academic integrity and the proper handling of potential plagiarism within an educational institution. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute, like any academic body, is bound by internal regulations and general principles of academic honesty to ensure the validity of its entrance examinations. The core challenge lies in balancing the need to uphold academic standards with the procedural fairness owed to applicants. A hasty or improperly documented decision could lead to appeals and damage the institute's reputation. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation that adheres to the institute's established procedures for addressing academic misconduct. This includes gathering concrete evidence of plagiarism, providing the applicant with an opportunity to respond to the allegations, and making a decision based on the findings and the institute's regulations. This ensures due process and a fair outcome, aligning with the principles of academic integrity and institutional governance. An incorrect approach would be to immediately disqualify the applicant without a thorough investigation or without allowing them to present their case. This bypasses established procedures and could be seen as arbitrary, violating principles of fairness and due process. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the findings of the quality control measures, which would undermine the integrity of the examination process and the institute's commitment to academic standards. Finally, an approach that involves publicizing the allegations before a formal decision is made would be a breach of confidentiality and could unfairly prejudice the applicant. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Identify the issue. Recognize the potential academic misconduct. 2. Consult relevant policies. Review the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's regulations on academic integrity and entrance examination procedures. 3. Gather evidence. Collect all relevant documentation and data supporting the quality control findings. 4. Initiate a formal process. Follow the institute's prescribed steps for investigating allegations of misconduct, which typically includes notifying the applicant and providing an opportunity to respond. 5. Evaluate findings and response. Objectively assess the evidence and the applicant's explanation. 6. Make a decision. Apply the institute's regulations to the findings. 7. Communicate the decision. Inform the applicant of the outcome and any consequences following established protocols. Question 16. Compliance review shows that during the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, a proctor observed a candidate appearing to discreetly consult notes hidden within their sleeve. The proctor reported the observation to the chief invigilator. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action according to the principles of academic integrity and examination fairness as expected at such an institution? Option A. The chief invigilator should ignore the observation as it is a minor suspicion and focus on ensuring the smooth running of the rest of the examination. Option B. The chief invigilator should approach the candidate during the exam and verbally warn them about the possibility of cheating, instructing them to put away any unauthorized materials. Option C. The chief invigilator should immediately confiscate the candidate's exam paper and escort them out of the examination hall, informing them they are disqualified for cheating. Option D. The chief invigilator should discreetly observe the candidate for further evidence of cheating, and if confirmed, note the specific details and the candidate's identification for a formal review after the exam concludes. Correct answer is C. The chief invigilator should immediately confiscate the candidate's exam paper and escort them out of the examination hall, informing them they are disqualified for cheating. Explanation. This scenario presents a challenge related to academic integrity and the proper handling of potential misconduct during an entrance examination at the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. The core professional challenge lies in balancing the need to uphold the integrity of the examination process with the requirement to act fairly and ethically towards candidates. A hasty or biased judgment could unfairly penalize a candidate, while inaction could compromise the credibility of the institute's admissions. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation. This means gathering all relevant information, including witness statements, if any, the candidate's submitted work, and any observed irregularities. The next crucial step is to consult the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's official examination regulations and academic integrity policies. These documents will outline the specific procedures for handling suspected cheating, including the rights of the candidate and the responsibilities of the examination proctors and administration. A formal review process, potentially involving an academic integrity committee, should be initiated to impartially assess the evidence against the established rules. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the Institute's established regulatory framework and ethical guidelines for examinations, ensuring due process for the candidate and maintaining the fairness and validity of the entrance exam. An incorrect approach would be to immediately disqualify the candidate based solely on suspicion, without a thorough investigation. This fails to respect the candidate's right to a fair hearing and bypasses the established procedural safeguards mandated by the Institute's regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed irregularity, which would undermine the integrity of the examination process and could lead to the admission of unqualified candidates, violating the Institute's commitment to academic standards. A third incorrect approach would be to apply penalties that are not prescribed by the Institute's regulations, such as imposing a punishment that is disproportionately severe or lenient, or one that is not part of the defined disciplinary actions for academic misconduct. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a commitment to fairness, adherence to established procedures, and a focus on evidence. Professionals must first identify the potential violation and the relevant institutional policies. They should then gather objective evidence, consult the official regulations, and follow the prescribed investigation and disciplinary procedures. This ensures that decisions are not arbitrary but are grounded in the Institute's rules and ethical principles, protecting both the institution's reputation and the rights of the individual. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a significant potential sponsor for a new research initiative at the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute has expressed concerns about the Institute's environmental impact assessment process for a related field project. The sponsor, a major oil company, has hinted that their continued financial support is contingent on a favorable and swift review, potentially overlooking minor environmental discrepancies. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the Institute's leadership? Option A. Immediately cease all discussions with the potential sponsor, citing ethical concerns about potential undue influence on the assessment process, without further investigation into the sponsor's specific concerns or the project's actual environmental impact. Option B. Conduct a thorough and independent environmental impact assessment, transparently disclosing all findings and engaging in open dialogue with the sponsor about mitigation strategies, while strictly adhering to Russian Federation environmental laws and the Institute's ethical guidelines. Option C. Proceed with the research initiative based on the sponsor's assurances of environmental responsibility, deferring a detailed independent environmental impact assessment until after the funding is secured and the project is underway. Option D. Expedite the environmental impact assessment process, focusing on presenting findings in a manner that minimizes perceived environmental risks to ensure the sponsorship is secured, relying on the sponsor's assurances regarding their own environmental compliance. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough and independent environmental impact assessment, transparently disclosing all findings and engaging in open dialogue with the sponsor about mitigation strategies, while strictly adhering to Russian Federation environmental laws and the Institute's ethical guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial interests of the Institute and the long-term ethical obligations to its students and the broader community. The pressure to secure funding can lead to compromises that undermine academic integrity and the Institute's reputation. Careful judgment is required to balance resource needs with ethical responsibilities. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations and relevant Russian Federation educational and environmental laws. This means conducting a thorough, independent assessment of the environmental impact and disclosing all findings, regardless of their potential effect on the sponsorship agreement. This approach upholds the institute's commitment to responsible scientific practice and public trust, aligning with the ethical principles of academic institutions and the legal requirements for environmental impact assessments in Russia. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying or omitting negative environmental findings to secure funding would be a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This would violate principles of scientific integrity and potentially contravene Russian environmental protection laws, which mandate accurate reporting of environmental risks. Such an action could lead to legal repercussions, damage the institute's credibility, and expose students and the surrounding community to unforeseen environmental hazards. Another incorrect approach, that of immediately terminating discussions with the sponsor without further investigation or consultation, might seem ethically sound in avoiding potential compromise. However, it fails to explore all avenues for responsible engagement and could be seen as an overreaction that misses an opportunity to influence the project towards more sustainable practices through open dialogue and the application of rigorous scientific standards, which is also a part of professional responsibility. A further incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the project based solely on the sponsor's assurances without independent verification, ignores the institute's duty of care and the potential for conflicts of interest. This would be a dereliction of professional responsibility and could lead to significant environmental damage and reputational harm, violating the trust placed in the institute by its stakeholders. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Next, they must meticulously review applicable laws, regulations, and ethical codes of conduct specific to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute and the Russian Federation. This is followed by a thorough assessment of the situation, gathering all necessary data and expert opinions. The core of the decision-making process involves evaluating potential courses of action against these legal and ethical benchmarks, prioritizing long-term integrity and public good over short-term gains. Open communication and consultation with relevant parties, including ethical review boards or legal counsel if necessary, are crucial steps before committing to a course of action. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential new sponsorship opportunity from a large petrochemical company that has faced public criticism regarding its environmental practices. The proposed sponsorship offers significant financial support for new laboratory equipment and student scholarships, but the company has requested a degree of influence over the selection of research projects funded by their contribution, specifically favoring those that might indirectly benefit their operational efficiency. How should the institute's leadership proceed? Option A. Initiate a thorough due diligence process on the sponsoring company, review the proposed terms for any conflicts of interest or undue influence on academic freedom, and ensure full transparency with faculty and students regarding the sponsorship and its conditions, in accordance with internal policies and Russian Federation educational regulations. Option B. Accept the sponsorship but discreetly manage the research project selection to subtly align with the company's interests, without formally disclosing the extent of this alignment to the wider institute community. Option C. Immediately accept the sponsorship to secure the much-needed equipment and scholarships, assuming the company's influence will be minimal and manageable. Option D. Reject the sponsorship outright due to the company's past environmental criticism, without further investigation into the specific terms of the proposed collaboration. The correct answer is A. Initiate a thorough due diligence process on the sponsoring company, review the proposed terms for any conflicts of interest or undue influence on academic freedom, and ensure full transparency with faculty and students regarding the sponsorship and its conditions, in accordance with internal policies and Russian Federation educational regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial interests of the institute and the long-term ethical obligations to its students and the broader community. The pressure to secure funding can lead to compromises that undermine academic integrity and the quality of education. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands while upholding the institute's core values and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal regulations and relevant Russian Federation educational standards regarding partnerships and sponsorships. This means conducting a thorough due diligence process on the potential sponsor, ensuring that the proposed collaboration aligns with the institute's educational mission and does not introduce conflicts of interest or compromise academic freedom. Specifically, it requires a clear understanding of the terms of the sponsorship, any potential influence on curriculum development or research, and the disclosure of such arrangements to relevant stakeholders, including students and faculty, as mandated by internal policies and federal educational guidelines. This upholds ethical principles of integrity and accountability. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the sponsorship without full disclosure and independent review would violate ethical principles of transparency and potentially contravene regulations concerning conflicts of interest in educational institutions. This could lead to a perception of undue influence by the sponsor on academic matters, eroding trust among students, faculty, and the public. Another incorrect approach, which is to reject the sponsorship outright without exploring potential avenues for ethical collaboration, might be overly cautious and could deprive the institute of valuable resources that could benefit its students and research. However, if the due diligence reveals insurmountable ethical or regulatory conflicts, then rejection is the appropriate course. The failure here lies in a lack of nuanced assessment and a missed opportunity for responsible engagement. A third incorrect approach, which is to accept the sponsorship, but attempt to conceal its terms or potential implications from stakeholders, represents a significant ethical failure. This undermines trust and violates principles of accountability. It also risks future repercussions if the undisclosed terms are later revealed, potentially leading to reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. Next, they must thoroughly research and understand the applicable internal policies and external regulations. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, evaluating potential ethical, financial, and reputational impacts of each course of action. Finally, the decision should be made based on a commitment to integrity, transparency, and the long-term well-being of the institution and its students, always prioritizing compliance with the regulatory framework of the Russian Federation's educational sector. Question 19. The audit findings indicate a potential breach of examination regulations by a candidate during the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, specifically concerning the unauthorized use of external materials. What is the most appropriate course of action for the individual who discovered these findings? Option A. Confront the applicant directly and privately to discuss the observed irregularities and request an explanation. Option B. Immediately report the findings, along with all supporting evidence, to the designated Examination Oversight Committee or the Institute's admissions office. Option C. Discreetly inform other applicants about the suspected misconduct to gauge their awareness and potential reactions. Option D. Discuss the audit findings with a trusted faculty member who is not part of the examination committee to seek informal advice. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the findings, along with all supporting evidence, to the designated Examination Oversight Committee or the Institute's admissions office. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the applicant to navigate potential conflicts between academic integrity, institutional policy, and the ethical obligations of an aspiring professional in the petroleum sector. The Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute entrance exam, like any academic institution, operates under a framework of regulations and guidelines designed to ensure fairness, transparency, and the admission of qualified candidates. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate course of action when faced with evidence of academic misconduct, balancing the need to uphold these standards with the practicalities of the examination process. The correct approach involves a direct and transparent reporting of the audit findings to the appropriate examination committee or administrative body responsible for overseeing the entrance exam. This aligns with the principles of academic integrity and institutional governance. By formally documenting and escalating the issue, the applicant ensures that the examination process remains fair and that any potential breaches of conduct are addressed according to the established rules of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute. This proactive and rule-bound action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct, a crucial trait for future professionals in a highly regulated industry like petroleum. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the audit findings. This failure to act would implicitly condone academic misconduct, undermining the integrity of the entrance examination and the institution's standards. It would also represent a dereliction of ethical duty, as it allows a potential unfair advantage to persist. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the applicant suspected of misconduct without involving the official examination authorities. While seemingly proactive, this bypasses the established procedures for handling such matters. It could lead to an escalation of the situation, potential accusations of harassment, or an inability to resolve the issue effectively without the authority and investigative powers of the examination committee. This approach fails to respect the institutional framework designed to manage such disputes fairly and impartially. A further incorrect approach would be to attempt to resolve the issue informally by discussing it with other applicants or faculty members not officially designated to handle such matters. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors, damaging reputations and creating a hostile examination environment. It also fails to follow the prescribed channels for addressing academic integrity concerns, thereby undermining the formal processes. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Understanding the scope and implications of the audit findings within the context of the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's examination regulations. 2. Identifying the designated authority or committee responsible for overseeing the entrance examination and handling allegations of misconduct. 3. Formally and accurately documenting the audit findings. 4. Submitting the documented findings to the appropriate authority through the prescribed channels, ensuring a clear and objective presentation of the facts. 5. Cooperating fully with any subsequent investigation or review conducted by the institution. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest in the recent procurement of specialized drilling equipment, where a vendor with close personal ties to a senior procurement officer was awarded a significant contract without a fully documented competitive bidding process. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action for the auditor? Option A. Disregard the findings. Assuming the vendor's long-standing relationship with the institute implies a history of fair dealings and no irregularities. Option B. Consult with the senior procurement officer to understand their perspective and obtain assurances regarding the fairness of the process. Option C. Initiate a detailed review of all procurement documentation, communication records, and financial transactions related to the vendor in question to gather objective evidence. Option D. Immediately report the suspected conflict of interest to the institute's director, highlighting the personal ties and the lack of a competitive bid. The correct answer is C. Initiate a detailed review of all procurement documentation, communication records, and financial transactions related to the vendor in question to gather objective evidence. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest and a breach of ethical conduct within the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's procurement process. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to navigate the delicate balance between identifying potential wrongdoing and maintaining professional relationships, while strictly adhering to the internal regulations and ethical codes governing the institute. The pressure to uphold the integrity of the procurement process, ensure fair competition, and prevent financial impropriety necessitates a thorough and objective investigation. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of all relevant procurement documents, communication logs, and financial records pertaining to the identified vendor. This approach prioritizes gathering objective evidence to substantiate or refute the initial findings. It aligns with the principles of professional skepticism and due diligence expected of auditors. Specifically, it adheres to the Almetyevsk State Petroleum Institute's internal audit charter and the ethical guidelines for financial professionals, which mandate impartiality, integrity, and thoroughness in all investigative activities. The goal is to establish factual accuracy before any conclusions or recommendations are made. An incorrect approach that involves immediately reporting the suspicion to senior management without a preliminary evidence-gathering phase is professionally unacceptable. This premature action could lead to unfounded accusations, damage reputations, and create unnecessary alarm within the organization. It bypasses the fundamental audit principle of verifying findings before escalating them, potentially violating the Institute's internal procedures for handling audit discrepancies. Another incorrect approach which is to dismiss the findings due to the vendor's long-standing relationship with the institute, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a failure to adhere to the audit mandate of scrutinizing all transactions, regardless of prior history. It risks overlooking significant irregularities and undermines the audit function's credibility. Such an approach would contravene the Institute's commitment to transparency and accountability in its operations. A third incorrect approach, which is to confront the involved parties directly and seek their verbal assurances without documenting the process or seeking corroborating evidence, is ethically and procedurally flawed. This informal method lacks the rigor required for a proper audit investigation and leaves no verifiable record of the inquiry or the responses received. It fails to meet the standards of evidence collection and documentation expected by the Institute's internal control framework and professional auditing standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the nature of the audit finding and its potential implications. Second, consult relevant internal policies, procedures, and ethical codes. Third, develop a detailed plan for evidence collection, focusing on objective and verifiable data. Fourth, execute the plan with professional skepticism and impartiality. Fifth, analyze the collected evidence to form a well-supported conclusion. And finally, report findings and recommendations through the appropriate channels as per established protocols.